the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Let's go first to Tim in Dallas. Hi, Tim.
Hey, so you talked about infinite regression. I'm in the Diacadent, and we talked in philosophy about this, and I'd like to see if I could capture this on your podcast and relay it to our class.
Okay.
Is there any way that you could kind of go through that? The whole thing about the paintbrush was just really awesome, and I thought it was really interesting.
Thank you. Tell me what about the paintbrush analogy that you're thinking of, because I want to make sure I key in on exactly what you heard.
So what I understood was that the idea of this infinite regression of that there is no ultimate source is akin to a paintbrush painting on a canvas, the canvas being creation. Mm-hmm. And this paintbrush is maybe 12 inches long or a foot long. Well, let's just say it's 20 feet long. Well, let's just say the paintbrush is a football field long. Mm-hmm. Well, let's just say it keeps going, and there's no painter on the other end of the paintbrush. It just keeps going and going and going. And that was the whole, essentials of infinite regression, that there's no creator. It seems preposterous.
Exactly. So this is a great way to kind of launch into an overview of what are known as the 5 ways. It's called different things, but the 5 ways of demonstrating the existence of God. They don't prove it like in a scientific sense, but I think they demonstrate conclusively that there's no alternative to God when you consider these 5 things. So Aristotle pioneered them, St. Thomas Aquinas refined them and popularized them for a modern audience. But in essence, when we're talking about looking for causes and explanations for phenomena that we observe, whether it's a picture being painted on a canvas. Another analogy, I'll give you this one. It's a parallel analogy to the paintbrush one that I've used before, and it is that of a train. So if you're at the train crossing, the gate comes down, and you have to wait for that train to go by. And maybe it's already gone past except for the last 50 cars. And each of the cars, as you can see, all the way back to the caboose, is moving. You can see them moving. They're moving past you. But they're not moving under their own motive impulse. They're not moving under their own power. And when that caboose goes by, the last car on the train, you see it go by. You can observe the phenomenon of movement, but you know that each of these cars is only moving because the car in front of it that it's hitched up to is pulling it. But that car, let's say the one that's pulling the caboose, the second to last car on the train, that car is moving also. But it's only moving and it's only pulling the caboose because the car in front of it that it's hitched up to is pulling it. So talking about infinite regression, when we make the case for the existence of God, using this example or any other analogy, what we're saying is we can see the phenomenon. It's real. We see it happening. We see movement. One car is moving past another one. But the nature of trains is that they don't pull themselves. They don't have locomotion. But there must be somewhere at the front of this train, 100 cars down, 1,000 cars down, 1,000,000 trillion cars down, there must be an unmoved mover, namely the engine, because there's no other way to account for the movement that we see in all these other train cars. And so that unmoved mover we refer to as God. It's one of the properties of God. It's one of the characteristics, you might say. So otherwise, the only possible explanation would be if there isn't an unmoved mover at the beginning of the train, then there's no way to rationally account for the movement. You can't have an infinite regress of cars that are pulling the car behind it, and they're being pulled by the car in front of it, but there's nothing at the very front that's pulling all of them. That's a logical impossibility, and there's no way to account for that. So when we consider the case for God, we're looking at the natural phenomena that we observe and saying, well, this explains that. And we call this unmoved mover God, or we call the uncaused cause. That's one way to talk about God. Everything, when you look at the universe, every single thing in the universe has a cause. The fact that it exists means that it was caused. And the cause of something that exists must necessarily exist before the thing itself. So it's outside of that thing, and it predates that thing chronologically. And even the universe itself This too, we can see in some manner came into existence. Was it the Big Bang? Maybe. We don't know if that was the beginning of the universe. Maybe whatever banged in the Big Bang was some precursor to the universe, but that had to come into existence from something. So the only way to account for all these cause and effects is that there has to be an uncaused cause that actually starts this whole process of cause and effect. Now, I could go, if you want, we could touch upon a couple of the other ways of talking about this, but they all fit very nicely together because we don't quote the Bible. I'm not citing a pope or a church council or anything. Just saying, let's look around us and see what we see and how do we account for that. And that's where the irrationality of infinite regression comes in.
What I hear from the counter argument or the humanist or the sort of the Dawkins-esque argument is that, well, there's this dark material.
Sure. Well, when I first read Richard Dawkins' landmark book, The God Delusion, I must say I was quite astonished, given his vaunted reputation. I was quite astonished that he spends over the course of 2 or 3 pages, I'd have to go back and count them, but it didn't seem like it was more than maybe 2 or 3 pages. He thinks he refuted Thomas Aquinas on these 5 ways of demonstrating the rationality of God, but he spends like maybe a paragraph or 2 on each one at best. So he doesn't come anywhere close to refuting this, and the easiest way to demonstrate that is to say, all right, well, dark matter, let's say that exists. That had to come from somewhere. Where did the dark matter come from? See, that's the logical fallacy of what's called begging the question. And begging the question doesn't mean this leads us to another question or this means that we should ask the next. It doesn't mean that at all. When I hear people talk about begging the question that way, I know they have never studied philosophy. But you have, so you'll understand this, that begging the question means that you're simply deferring answering the question by you're taking a step back from it, or you're pushing it back one step. But to say, oh, well, it's dark matter, that doesn't answer anything. It doesn't prove anything. It just simply begs the question. It pushes it back yet another step, which means where did the dark matter come from? So just using the basics of logic and reasoning, I think you'll find that it's not difficult to poke holes in those kind of pseudo answers like dark material. I don't argue that dark material doesn't exist. I don't know much about that other than what I've read in works like his, but it doesn't answer the question. So my advice would be you can easily master these 5 proofs for the existence of God and adapt them with analogies that you find helpful. I'm glad you like the paintbrush analogy. But I would say these are actually unanswerable questions. The atheists, they try to give answers, but they're not convincing answers. And how are you going to argue for an infinite regression of paintbrushes, or the size of the paintbrush painting? You see the painting, it's there. But if there's nobody painting it, then there's no way to account for this. We can, though, because God is the explanation.
I think we've talked about this in our classes. It's almost as if the atheist says, well, I don't know really what the answer is or how it started, but I know it's not God. Right.
That's right.
It's just so funny.
Oh, did you ever see the, I think it's called Expelled, if I'm not mistaken, and the great actor and economist, I'm blanking on his name, but he was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He played the school teacher.
Ben Stein.
Ben Stein, yeah, I love that guy. He did this movie called Expelled. It's very good, and he interviews people.
Heard of it. I don't think I've seen it. Heard of it.
Oh, I would watch it. Yeah, the Deacon class should watch it. I think they'd benefit greatly. But there's this scene where he's interviewing Richard Dawkins, and he's basically just trying to talk to him about why do you reject the idea that God exists, and he corners him. It's a beautiful moment in the movie. He corners him by asking him, well, then if God doesn't exist, then how did all these things come into existence? How did life, for example, begin on planet Earth? Mm-hmm. And without blinking an eye, Richard Dawkins says, well, it's possible. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that aliens came here and seeded this planet with Earth or with life. And what's funny about it, and I'm glad you're laughing, is because there you have begging the question again. It's just, he's not answering the question. He's certainly not proving anything. He's just pushing it back one step because the next question should be, well, where did those aliens come from?
Exactly.
Right. Let me turn you on to a great book, Tim. I have a feeling you and the Deacon class will really enjoy this. It's a book co-authored by Dr. Peter Kreeft, Kreeft. I'm sure you know of him. The other co-author is Father Ron Tacelli, Tacelli. And I know it should be pronounced Tacelli, but he says he gave up trying to get people to pronounce it the right way. Right. So both philosophers at Boston College, and although I don't know if either of them are currently teaching anymore, it is a book called Handbook of Catholic Apologetics. Handbook of Catholic Apologetics. It is wonderful. I've been teaching apologetics at the university level for 12 years now. And I've taught seminarians and lay students, but this one book, above all the others, is so popular because it's so easy to understand these basic concepts the way they lay them out. So especially in the first part of the book where primarily they talk about atheism, and they look at all the major atheist arguments, the problem of evil, things like that. But when you read this section on the 5 ways, as we call them, it's mind-blowing and it's very helpful. And so once you've mastered them and have memorized the basic points of each one, you can deploy that at any moment in a conversation with an atheist. And you don't have to mention God at all, other than say, this is why we believe in God, because without God, the alternative is impossible. So check it out.
Okay. I'll check it out. We're reading a book by Peter Kreeft right now, but I can't think of the name of it. I'm reading so many books, my brain's about to explode.
I think anything that Peter Kreeft writes is worthy of attention. He's such a good writer. He's so insightful, and I call him our generation C.S. Lewis. He's a great treasure.
Well, I include Patrick Madrid in there too.
Oh, no, he's way above me in that category, but I appreciate the comment.
All right. Well, I love your show. God bless you, and look forward to hearing more about everything.
Thank you, and shout out to all the deacons in your class. I hope you have a wonderful and holy experience leading up to your ordination. May God will it. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.